Have you ever felt like you were being watched, even when you were completely alone? There are moments in life when something happens that you can't explain, something that shakes your perception of reality so completely, you're left questioning everything you thought you knew. I'm not talking about the kind of unease you might feel when you think someone's watching you. No, this was something deeper, something more unsettling. It's the feeling you get when you're sure there's something there, just beyond the edge of your vision. It's that creeping, silent certainty that something or someone is aware of you, even when you're alone. It all began one night when I was driving home. The road was quiet, almost too quiet, like the world was holding its breath. I'd been down that path hundreds of times before, but this time something felt off. The streetlights cast long shadows across the pavement, and the hum of the engine was the only sound I could hear, but the silence in the air felt heavy. It was late, but I wasn't exhausted, just lost in my thoughts. Maybe that's why, when I took a wrong turn, it didn't seem all that strange at first. Roads all seem to blend together when you've driven them enough, don't they? But this was different. As I continued down the road, I couldn't help but feel as though I was being pulled in. A strange magnetic force that had me moving further into this unfamiliar place. I didn't notice it at first, but then I saw it. A house, standing alone just off the side of the road. At first glance, it seemed like any other house, but as I drove past, I realized something was wrong. All the lights were on, every single one of them, and yet there was no sign of life. No cars parked outside, no movement inside. But then I saw her, a woman, standing in the window, staring out at me. It wasn't just the fact that she was there. It wasn't even the fact that she was watching me so intently. What unsettled me the most was that I couldn't tell who she was. I didn't recognize her, and yet I felt like she knew exactly who I was. I didn't know why, but the urge to leave, to drive as fast as I could, hit me like a shock. I didn't even think, I just reacted. And yet, something stayed with me long after I'd passed that house. That feeling of being watched, the eyes of that woman still on me, still following me in my mind. It wasn't a fleeting moment of discomfort. It was a full-on gut feeling that something wasn't right. Something was out of place, and I had seen it. But here's the thing. A few days later, I went back. I had to find that house again to understand what had happened, what I had seen. I thought maybe it was just a trick of the mind, some fleeting, irrational fear. But when I searched, when I tried to find that road again, it wasn't there. I checked old maps, I drove up and down the area where I thought it should have been, but the road was gone. The house? It never existed. It was as if it had been erased from every trace of reality, leaving nothing behind but the unsettling memory of what I had seen. The more I tried to make sense of it, the more everything I knew began to unravel. Was it my mind playing tricks on me? Or had I stumbled onto something that I wasn't meant to find? Something that existed outside of what I could understand. And the woman, her image is still burned into my mind, her eyes haunting me. Even now, what was she trying to tell me? What was watching me that night? And why? This isn't just a story about a wrong turn and a strange encounter. It's a story about a night that made me question the very fabric of reality itself. A story of what happens when you come across something that doesn't belong, something that doesn't fit, something that doesn't exist but still haunts you, even when it's gone. What did I really see that night? And was I ever meant to see it at all? Because what I found that night might never have been meant for anyone to discover. At the time, driving home was the same every night. It was a familiar route, a route that had become so ingrained in my daily routine, I could practically drive it with my eyes closed. The road was long, but the kind that never made you feel alone. Streetlights lined the sides, casting their yellow glow on the pavement as if guiding me home. Every corner, every curve, I knew them all. It was safe, comfortable, but that night, something felt different. As I cruised through the neighborhood, the usual sounds of the tires against the road seemed distant, like they were fading into the background. The faint hum of the engine was the only noise that kept me grounded. The world outside felt calm, too calm, and my mind drifted with the steady rhythm of the car. But when I took that wrong turn, that one I didn't even remember making, it was like everything shifted. At first, I didn't realize I'd gone off the familiar path. It was a gentle bend in the road, so subtle I almost missed it, but the moment the tires hit that unmarked stretch, something inside me stirred. The quiet wasn't the same anymore. The air, though still, felt heavier, more oppressive. My headlights, which normally cut through the darkness with ease, now seemed to barely scrape the surface of the thickening night. The road narrowed, the shoulders falling away into pitch-black shadows. I couldn't see past the trees and thick brush lining the way. It felt as though the road itself was leading me somewhere I wasn't supposed to be. And the further I drove, the more the unease spread, quiet at first, like a subtle tug at the back of my mind, until it became undeniable. The road didn't look familiar. Nothing looked familiar. It wasn't a major road or even a side street. It was just a forgotten stretch of asphalt that seemed to vanish into the woods on either side. The trees loomed over me, their branches swaying unnaturally, like they were reaching for the car. I glanced around, but nothing felt right. The houses, the buildings, all seemed far away, as if this road existed outside of time or place. A deep chill crept up my spine as I pressed my foot lightly on the gas, trying to shake off the feeling that I was being led into something unknown. And then the streetlights, they flickered. At first I thought it was the car, but no, it was the lights themselves. They blinked in and out as if struggling to stay on, casting strange, jittery shadows that danced wildly on the road ahead. The only other sound now was the hum of my engine, the usual background noise, the gentle rustle of the wind, the distant chirping of crickets was gone, replaced by an eerie stillness. The air outside the car felt thick, charged like something was waiting for me. The leaves on the trees started to rustle, but there was no wind. It was unnerving how out of place it all felt. It wasn't a natural sound, more like something scraping, shifting in the dark just out of sight. The longer I stayed on this road, the more I felt it. Something was wrong. The quiet wasn't peaceful. It was suffocating, like the world was holding its breath. Then through the flickering streetlights, I saw it. A house. A large, old house that seemed to rise from the very shadows themselves. It was dark, imposing, and out of place. The windows were all aglow, every single light inside shining bright against the night, as though the house had never known the dark. But there was something wrong with it, something about the way the lights flickered, like they weren't supposed to be on, like the house had been abandoned long ago, but had somehow come to life. I slowed the car involuntarily, as if the house had some sort of gravitational pull. I couldn't look away. The windows loomed large in my headlights, and there, standing still as a statue, was a woman. She stood perfectly still, her figure framed by the window, but I couldn't see her face. Not clearly. It was like the shadows obscured her features, hiding the details of her expression. But her eyes, I could feel her eyes on me, even as I drove past. I don't know how to explain it, but it wasn't just a feeling of being watched. It was more than that. It was as if she knew me, knew everything about me, without ever saying a word. I felt a cold sweat creep down the back of my neck, and my heartbeat quickened. There was something so unsettling about the way she stood there, unmoving, her gaze locked onto mine, even as I drove away. I didn't dare look back. Something deep in my gut told me not to. But as I drove away, trying to shake the eerie feeling that had taken root in my chest, I couldn't stop thinking about the house. About the woman. Why was she staring at me? And why, in a place so isolated, did every light in the house burn so brightly? It didn't make sense. It couldn't make sense. I told myself I was being irrational, that I had let my mind wander too far down a dark path. But deep down, I knew something was wrong. Something was off. I wasn't even sure I should have been on that road to begin with. But now, I couldn't shake the thought that I had stumbled across something I wasn't supposed to see. A house that didn't belong, with a woman who didn't belong, standing in a place where nothing should have been alive at all. And the worst part, as I sped down the road, I couldn't shake the feeling that she wasn't just watching me leave. She was waiting for me to return. The next day, the image of that house and the woman staring at me lingered in my mind like a shadow I couldn't shake. I told myself it had to be some trick of the night, a figment of my imagination playing games with me in the dark. I tried to dismiss it as nothing more than a momentary lapse in my otherwise dull drive home. But something in me was unsettled. I couldn't stop thinking about it. So I decided to drive back to retrace my steps. I told myself I'd just go down the road again, the one I'd accidentally turned onto. I figured I could prove to myself that I was just overreacting, that there was no mystery, no strange house, no woman watching from the window. It should have been simple, right? Just take the same turn, drive the same stretch, and everything would return to normal. But when I reached the spot where I'd veered off the main road the night before, nothing. There was no turn, no unmarked road. I slowed down, scanning the area, my eyes darting from side to side, but the road ahead was the same as it always had been. There was no narrow, winding street, no stretch of asphalt that led into the trees. My heart began to race. Had I somehow misremembered? Maybe I'd taken a different turn that night, one I wasn't recalling clearly. The mind plays tricks, right? But the feeling of déjà vu was overpowering, like I had been here before, like the road should have been right in front of me, just as I had seen it that night. I drove further down the highway, thinking maybe I had missed it in my confusion. But as I passed familiar landmarks, the unease began to settle deeper into my bones. Nothing felt right. The streets all seemed too familiar, and the landscape seemed too unchanged. The road was exactly as it had always been, and yet somehow I was still convinced I had seen something else, something that should have been there. I didn't give up easily. I had to find that house. So I kept driving. The longer I drove, the more I convinced myself that it was real. That house, that woman, the lights. I needed to prove it. I had to. But every turn I took only led me to more dead ends. I scoured the area, retracing my path again and again, but it was all the same. An endless loop of the ordinary, nothing out of place, no sign of that road, no sign of the house. I stopped at gas stations and asked locals if they knew of any roads that could lead into the woods, roads that weren't listed on any map. But they all looked at me like I was crazy. "There's no road like that," one man said, shaking his head as he gave me a strange, sympathetic look. "You must have gotten lost. Happens to everyone around here." But I wasn't lost. I knew what I had seen. I had seen that house. I decided to pull out my phone, hoping maybe, just maybe, I could find some digital trace of the road. After all, there had to be something, some map, some GPS signal, some trace of where I had driven. But when I zoomed in on the area, the same thing happened. There was nothing. The road I had turned down the night before didn't appear on any map, not even on the most detailed ones. It was as if it had never existed at all. I couldn't let it go. I couldn't just chalk it up to a bad memory or a trick of the light. I needed answers. I couldn't stop thinking about the house. I even went so far as to check old maps, maps from decades ago, maps that predated the new developments in the area. But again, there was nothing. No mention of this road, no sign of the house I had passed. It was like I was looking for something that didn't belong in this world. The more I searched, the more I felt something dark creeping in. It wasn't just the house that was missing. It was the whole memory of the road. Like it was never meant to exist, like it had been erased. Every map, every source, every piece of information I looked at only deepened the pit in my stomach. How could something so real, something I had seen with my own eyes, simply vanish without a trace? And then the question started. How could a house that had clearly existed the night before, with every light blazing in the windows, just disappear? Was I imagining things? Was it possible I had driven too long in the dark, my mind playing tricks on me? Or had I stumbled onto something else? Something else? I could feel the doubt creeping in, but it didn't make sense. It didn't explain the woman standing there, her eyes fixed on me. It didn't explain why I could still hear the rustling of leaves from that night, the way they moved as though they were whispering to me. The tension in my chest tightened. I didn't know how to explain it, but the feeling that something had gone horribly wrong, that I had crossed some boundary I wasn't supposed to, grew stronger with each passing hour. I couldn't escape the feeling that I was being watched again. Even as I sat there, staring at the empty road in front of me, I couldn't shake the thought that there was someone out there waiting for me to return. I had to know the truth. But the truth felt like it was slipping away, like it was just beyond my grasp, taunting me with its absence. And I couldn't help but wonder, what if I was never meant to find it again? I couldn't let go. The more I thought about that night, the more the images of that house and the woman haunted me. I had to know more. I had to find something, anything that would make sense of it. So, I turned to the people around me. Friends, neighbors, anyone who might have some insight into this strange place. I started by asking people who lived nearby. I made the rounds, casually bringing up the topic of the road, the house, the woman. But each person I spoke to seemed baffled. They all looked at me like I was out of my mind. One friend even laughed it off, suggesting I had watched too many horror movies or had too much to drink. But that didn't explain it. I knew what I had seen. No one had ever heard of the road. No one knew of a house matching the one I described. People seemed almost uncomfortable when I brought it up, changing the subject quickly, their faces showing subtle signs of confusion, even fear. As I sat in my car, thinking back on the details of that night, things started to get even stranger. The house. I remember it vividly. It looked old, but it wasn't run down. It wasn't abandoned. There were no broken windows, no peeling paint, no overgrown lawns. It was as if someone had been maintaining it. But there was something off about it. Why hadn't I ever seen it before? I had lived in this area for years. I drove down this very road countless times, yet that house had never been there. And when I searched, it still wasn't on any map. I started questioning everything, the road, the house, my own memory. But the most chilling thing, the thing I couldn't stop thinking about, was the woman. The image of her stayed with me. Her face, or rather, her lack of a face. At first, I thought I had just caught a glimpse of her in the window, But when I thought back, I realized something was wrong. The more I tried to remember, the more vivid she became in my mind. I could see her in perfect detail. Her hair, the outline of her figure, but I could never make out her features. The glass of the window had reflected everything except her face. And that made no sense. How could I see everything else so clearly, but not her face? I knew she was there, but I couldn't see her. And what unnerved me the most, I had driven past that same house countless times since that night, hoping to catch another glimpse of it, to confirm my own sanity. But the house was gone. The road had vanished, as if it had never been there. And the woman? She was nowhere. Not a single soul in sight. Then I remembered something that made my blood run cold. I had told myself that I had seen her face, just from the reflection of the window. But no, I hadn't. I couldn't remember her blinking. In fact, her eyes, even from the distance I was at, seemed unnaturally fixed. Her gaze, it never wavered. I couldn't tell if I was just overthinking it, if my mind was playing tricks on me. But when I looked closely at the image in my memory, something wasn't right. Something had to be wrong. She didn't blink. She just stared. I told myself that I was imagining it, that it was just a trick of the mind. But deep down, I couldn't shake the feeling that the woman wasn't human. I had never seen her move. Not a single twitch. Not even a blink. Just that cold, unblinking stare. And I kept thinking about those eyes. How could someone stand at a window for so long, unmoving, unblinking, in perfect stillness? I started digging deeper, researching places in the area that had any connection to old stories or legends. The more I researched, the more I uncovered stories, some old, some more recent, about people who had disappeared, about places that didn't exist or roads that no longer seemed to lead anywhere. But nothing that matched exactly what I had experienced. Was it just my mind playing tricks on me? Or was there something more? I couldn't ignore the feeling that something was hiding just beneath the surface. A place that didn't belong, a woman who shouldn't have been there. I kept asking myself, was this just a trick of the mind? Or had I stumbled upon something I wasn't supposed to see? And then I came across a report from decades ago, a story about a house built on a plot of land that had been abandoned long before any of the nearby homes had even been established. The house had been abandoned for years, but the strange part was it was never supposed to be there in the first place. The land had been left empty. No records, no previous owners. The house wasn't supposed to exist. And then the piece that made everything fall into place. There was a woman who had lived in the house, or so the story went. She had been seen staring out of the window, day after day, night after night. But then she vanished. No one ever knew what happened to her. The house, too, was said to have disappeared like it was never built at all. People spoke of it in hushed tones, as if they were afraid to even mention it. I had found the answer to the question I hadn't dared to ask myself. The house, the woman, none of it was supposed to exist. Now, I couldn't ignore it any longer. I had been drawn to that place for a reason. I had seen something I wasn't supposed to see, and now, I wasn't sure if I'd ever be able to leave. I wish I could say that I found some peace, that I managed to move on after uncovering that old story about the house. But I didn't. Not at all. Every day it consumed me more. I became obsessed with finding the answers, as if uncovering the truth would somehow put my mind at ease. But the more I searched, the more I realized just how deep the mystery went. It wasn't something that could be easily explained or dismissed. I found myself driving around the neighborhood over and over again. I would go to the place where the house should have been, hoping against hope that I'd see something, anything, that would make sense of it all. But every time I reached that stretch of road, I saw only the same empty street, nothing out of the ordinary. And the frustration, the fear, it was starting to eat me alive. And that woman, her face, her unblinking eyes, they never left my mind. I couldn't escape her. Every time I closed my eyes, there she was staring at me, as if waiting for me to return. I still see her sometimes, in the corners of my vision, when I'm alone. It's almost like she's there, watching me, waiting for me to come back, as if something is drawing me back to that house. I can't explain it. Every time I think about it, I feel a deep, gnawing dread that rises in my chest. I don't know what she wants, but I know that I can't go back there. I'm too afraid. But the problem is I can't stop thinking about it. I can't stop trying to understand it. Something about it is wrong. I can feel it in my bones. Something happened that night, and I can't shake the feeling that it's far from over. Maybe you think I'm crazy, or that this is just some product of my imagination. Maybe you think I'm making it all up. I wouldn't blame you if you did. If I were in your shoes, I'd probably think the same thing. But I swear to you, this wasn't just my mind playing tricks on me. I know what I saw. I know what I felt. I felt the weight of her gaze on me that night. The silence, the stillness, it was too real. It wasn't a hallucination. It wasn't a dream. I was wide awake. The night I drove past that house, I was alone, and I was clear-headed. I saw her standing there, her eyes locked on mine, as if she had been waiting for me. And I didn't just see her, I felt her. I felt her presence in a way that I can't explain. It's like she was calling me, pulling me in. But why? And why me? I know what you're probably thinking. This can't be real. There's no way. But the longer I've lived with this, the more I'm convinced that there's something about that house, about that road, that I don't understand. Something I'm not meant to understand. You might be thinking, why don't you just leave it alone? Forget about it. Move on. But I can't. I can't just forget about it. Because I feel like I'm being followed. Like something is waiting for me to return, to finish what I started. But I don't know if I can go back. I'm telling you this because I need you to understand. I don't know if I'll ever get the answers I'm looking for. But whatever this is, this thing, this presence that I encountered, it's far beyond anything I could have ever imagined. And now, I wonder, do any of you recognize it? Have you ever felt this way? Like you're being pulled into something you can't control? Something that doesn't belong in this world? Because if you have, then I think you might know exactly what I'm talking about. I want to hear from you. Maybe this story hit too close to home. Maybe you felt that same creeping unease before, or perhaps you've experienced something that shouldn't exist. Have you ever seen a place that wasn't supposed to be there, or felt the weight of someone's gaze, even when you were sure you were alone? If you've been in a situation like this, or if you have any theories about what happened to me, what this thing could have been, please leave your thoughts in the comments below. I'm not the only one who's been through something like this, right? There's got to be someone out there who knows what this feeling is. Someone who's had an encounter with something they couldn't explain. Don't keep it to yourself. Share it with me. I need to know if I'm the only one who's been touched by whatever this is. And if you want to hear more stories like this, if you're intrigued by the mystery, the unanswered questions, and the eerie unknown, make sure you subscribe. Hit that bell icon so you never miss a chilling moment. Trust me, you won't want to miss what's coming next. I've got more stories, more strange encounters, more things that go beyond what we can explain, waiting to be shared with you. So, if you're ready to step into the unknown again, make sure you don't miss it. Subscribe, and let's uncover these dark secrets together. After days, maybe even weeks, of obsession, I knew I had to go back. There was no more denying it. The questions, the unease, the feeling that something was slipping through my fingers. I had to return, not because I wanted to, but because I couldn't live with the uncertainty anymore. It was the only way to put this to rest, or so I thought. This time, I drove in the dead of night, no distractions, just the hum of the engine and the weight of my thoughts. The street lights above flickered as I turned onto that same road, the one I couldn't find before. This time, though, I had a strange sense of knowing that I would finally find something, anything that could explain what I had seen. I felt my heart race as I turned down what should have been the same path. The closer I got, the more it felt like something was wrong, too wrong. Something wasn't adding up. The trees along the sides of the road seemed to close in on me, their dark silhouettes swaying eerily, like they were watching me, waiting. My mind screamed at me to turn around, but I pressed on, determined to get answers. Then I saw it. I saw the clearing in the distance where the house should have been. But there was nothing there, not even a trace, just a void of space, a strange emptiness in the night. I slowed the car to a crawl, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. And that's when it hit me. The road itself was gone. The street I had driven down, the very one I had seen with my own eyes, it wasn't there anymore. I parked the car, stepping out onto the ground, trying to figure out what was happening. In place of the road was nothing but thick, dense woods. The kind you'd expect to find miles away from civilization. But I was sure this was the spot. This was where I had driven just days ago, and now it was gone. I walked a few paces, trying to see if I had just missed the road somehow. But no, there was nothing. Just the oppressive silence of the forest, the cold chill in the air that made my skin crawl. And then something caught my eye. A flicker, a glimmer of light. The lights from the house, coming from deep within the trees, flickering like a distant fire. I froze. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up. I wasn't supposed to be here. I shouldn't have come back. I slowly turned toward where I thought the house had been, and for a moment, I thought I saw her. The woman. Her face was barely visible through the branches. Her eyes, those eyes, locked on mine from behind the darkness. She didn't move. She just stood there, watching me, unblinking. I don't know what happened next. I couldn't tear my eyes away from her. She seemed closer now, and yet I knew she was still far away, somewhere beyond the trees. But what was even more unsettling was the feeling that I was no longer in control. Something was pulling me deeper into the woods, like the very ground beneath me was alive, guiding me somewhere I shouldn't go. I don't know how long I stood there. Time seemed to stretch and warp, the cold creeping into my bones, the sound of the wind like 1,000 whispers. But one thing was clear. The woman, she wasn't going anywhere, and neither was I. Finally, I snapped myself out of it. I had to leave, but just as I turned, the reality of the situation hit me like a slap to the face. The road had disappeared, and she wasn't just watching me from the window anymore. She was here, somewhere close, too close. I rushed back to the car, my hands shaking as I fumbled with the keys. My heart was pounding in my chest, and every nerve in my body was screaming at me to get out of there fast. But as I looked back one last time, I swear I saw her again. This time, there was no window, no house to hide behind. She was standing there in the woods, right in front of me. I blinked, and she was gone. The car roared to life, and I sped off without looking back, my mind racing, my breath shallow. But even now, months later, I can still feel her eyes on me, still hear the silence of the woods. Was it all just my mind playing tricks? Or did I stumble onto something I wasn't supposed to see? Maybe one day I'll go back, try to figure out what really happened. But I fear that if I do, this time, she might not let me leave.